Everyone to the Alliance of Angels webinar 13 Strategic Marketing Imperatives, what startups need to get right to improve time to market, avoid costly missteps, and ramp revenue. I'm Bob Wallach. I'm an angel investor and also an AOA board member, and I'll be hosting today's event. Just a few housekeeping matters before we get started. I've asked everyone to go on mute, and I think I've group muted everyone, but if you could just make sure you stay on mute, we'll be taking questions through the chat window. So feel free during the webcast to type in your questions either during or at the end, and we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. Also, we'll be sending the slides out to all the attendees, so you'll be receiving those along with a survey a day or two after this event. And so with that, I wanted to say a few words about the Alliance of Angels and then introduce our speaker. Elisa, if you could forward to the next slide, please. Great. So Alliance of Angels is an interesting organization. For quite some time, we've been at the center of angel investing in the Northwest. We're the largest angel group with over 140 members, and a really interesting mix of individual angel investors, some of the areas, super angels, who are folks who are highly invested in a wide number of startups and very influential in the community. We've got family offices and also local VCs that participate. So you hit a wide range of investment types that can take you not only from the early stages, but on through. We happen to be the #1 funder of female-led startups in the Pacific Northwest, and we fund the most deals of any angel group in the area. We do roughly 20 deals a year, averaging around $10 million in investment, which is pretty significant. Roughly 40% of the companies that presented our member meetings get funded. The average amount is between $250 and $500, but we've had multi-million-dollar investments as well come through. And we're sector agnostic. We go through a wide range of from consumer products, tech, obviously, life sciences, et cetera. Next slide, please. Importantly, the Alliance of Angels is a milestone that helps people get further fundraising. Our members are highly networked to other sources of capital, so when AOA funds a deal, it's often a good housekeeping seal of approval for other funding sources, and we can connect to those funding sources. We have other angel groups that actually come to our meeting as a way to source deals, so it syndicates out that way. And a good track record. 80% of the entrepreneurs who receive funding from the AOA complete or exceed their round. And important for us, and a big part of the culture at AOA, is that we help with more than money. We've got lots of folks with experience in almost any business sector and discipline you can imagine. A very high proportion of our members have been entrepreneurs. Some currently are, and some have been in the past. And we take great pride in providing advice and contacts and connections for business growth and further financing. Next slide, please. So with that, I'd like to turn to introducing our speaker today. Lisa Fernow has a significant amount of experience as a strategist, a global marketing executive, and an expert in the area of consumer insights. She's worked at some large companies that you'll know, PepsiCo, Cartoon Network, Nordstrom, and others. She lectures with UW CoMotion, Seattle University, WeWork Labs, Founder Institute, and here with us at AOA, and has a blog with the Marketing Executive Network Group and the American Marketing Association. Lisa has her own consulting firm, and she focuses on helping startups, both the B2B and B2C space, become successful, focusing on marketing strategy and business issues. And so we're delighted to have Lisa. Lisa, welcome, and I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for attending. It's lovely to meet you all virtually. I wanted to start with a kind of fun test just for you guys. The question I have for you is, do you believe any of these statements? Because some of them are only partly true and others are plain wrong. So if you believe, if you build it, they will come, your customers are exactly like you, your baby or your product is beautiful, Marketing happens after you make your product. Marketing is PR and SEO and digital advertising. If you thought any of those statements were 100% true, you should be hearing this. My presentation discusses 13 strategic marketing imperatives to focus on, which is kind of a checklist for CEOs and marketers. And this was developed based on interviews with entrepreneurs, investors, and subject matter experts, and also draws from my years of experience working with companies at all stages. So think of this as a high-level overview, Marketing 101 for startups. I'll be running through this fairly quickly, but the PowerPoint will be available afterwards. The objective of this is to make you aware of each strategic imperative, and if there's interest, we may hold future webinars that can go deeper into some of the specific areas. It's important to point out that these imperatives apply to all types of businesses. It doesn't matter whether you're B2B, B2C, or another combination thereof, or even for profit or not for profit. So in this presentation, I've tried to provide a balance of examples from B2B and B2C, as well as different industries and founder backgrounds. So let's get started. The big question is, what exactly is marketing? And the American Marketing Association defines marketing more broadly than you might imagine. It's much more than advertising, promotions, social media, and PR. Their definition of marketing is the activity, set of institutions, and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that have value for customers, clients, partners, and society at large. I'm asked to start my video. So put another way, marketing in its broadest sense involves 4 stages. Actions a company takes to identify an unmet need, develop compelling solutions that competitors can't match, bring them to market, and accelerate performance to deliver a sustainable profit. And a misstep in any of these areas can sink your company. The most successful companies will place the consumer or customer at the center of their innovation process. And marketing works in close collaboration with other functions. Marketing actions are actually undertaken by everyone in the company. But the dilemma that startups face is that you need to make critical marketing decisions before you can typically afford to bring in a CMO. But if you don't make the right decisions, you end up having to repeat work later, which costs time, money, and market position. So as you listen, I'd like you to consider which imperatives seem most useful to your situation. This can be dependent on a number of factors: what type of business you're launching, where you are in the process, and who else is on your team. So just think of leaving this presentation with just one to work on. So why should every startup pay attention to marketing? And the quick answer is because it can make or break your success. This chart shows one industry observer's take on the top reasons that CEOs give for startup failure. The source for this is CB Insights, which is based on their analysis of 101 startup CEO postmortems. And most startups failed for multiple reasons, so these numbers won't add up to 100%. But if you look at the green bars, those are areas where marketing plays a role. And by the way, 9 out of 10 startups eventually fail. And I'm not trying to discourage anyone here, but just to recognize that doing a startup is very hard work and not for the faint-hearted. A marketing orientation can help prevent a sad tragedy of failing. So let's start with the first stage, which is identifying the need. So the first thing you want to be able to do is validate that the market need exists for your product or service and sharpen your knowledge of the opportunity. So what exactly is the problem you're solving and for whom? Is this a substantial problem across a large definable market? How large? What solution are you replacing and where would your volume come from? What are your strengths and weaknesses against existing and emerging competitors and substitutes? Why do you want to enter this market and why will you succeed better than anyone else? How do you know you're entering at the right time? So these are some of the questions your investors will ask, and validating the market need will help you focus your efforts as a company, which can mean shorter time to market and greater market success. How you do this is by doing secondary research and talking to potential customers, partners, and experts, which brings us to number 2, understanding your ecosystem. Identifying and talking to your key stakeholders helps you understand whether there is ecosystem support for your idea, and if so, what it will take to be successful. I've bucketed possible stakeholders into 4 buckets here, but you may find there are others. Under target, who buys, who pays, who uses? Who are you getting interest from? What need does this fill for them? What's missing in their lives that your product or service can provide? How would they buy it? Who decides how? How long does it take? All of those kinds of questions. Under product, who is involved in making your product or service? Consider who's manufacturing it, both internally and externally, but also who supplies inputs to it. Who services your product or service, and who regulates it? What do they need? How can it work for them? Under go-to-market, how will people hear about your innovation? Who are the key influencers or thought leaders you could tap into? Who sells, who distributes? Who could be strategic partners for you? What do they need and how can it work for them? Under competition, you might consider your direct competitors, but also indirect substitutes. And that can include doing nothing. Who might detract from or sabotage your efforts? How can you be better than they are? And how can you blunt their efforts to stop you? So understanding your ecosystem helps inform your decision to go to market as a B2B, B2B2C, or B2C. The decision on how to do this is a big one, and sometimes the answer can be surprising. But once this is decided, the target customers and buyer segments need to be prioritized, and you'll want to get traction with one segment before you take on the world. Along the way, you want to look for ways to activate network effects. And network effects happen when a good or service becomes more valuable when more people use it. And startups can take off when they can tap into these. So think about which groups in your ecosystem are critical to the success of your company, which value you're offering the most, and which are most influential. So this is an example from a company that I worked with named Medify. Medify is a software services company started by UW entrepreneur in residence Derek Street. His daughter suffered from a rare medical condition. After researching her condition and finding it frustrating to sift through all the databases for the exact research that pertained to their situation, he was inspired to found Medify. Medify basically collects these databases in one place and allows people to search on the exact criteria they're looking for. The need was clearly there for patients and their caregivers, and Derek originally decided to go after the consumer market as a B2C play. And the question became which consumer segments or conditions to focus on: breast cancer, leukemia, autism, or others. But after talking with physicians, hospitals, insurers, drug manufacturers, and advocacy groups that supported them, it was easy to prioritize which conditions were likely to have the best network effect. But after building out the software and carefully watching who was actually using the product, it turned out that while patients and caregivers had a direct stake in being better informed, it was physicians who actually valued Medify the most because it saved them time they could otherwise be spending with patients. So Medify refocused on a B2B model and went after physicians treating their priority conditions, and Medify was successful and was acquired. So summarizing the first stage, identify the need. If you can't find a product market fit with an attractive market that wants to buy your product now, it's time to go back to the drawing board. So let's talk about the second stage, which is developing the solution. Imperative number 3 is develop your value proposition or positioning statement. A value proposition is a statement that articulates what you're offering in response to the needs you've identified. It's a promise, what your target audience gets versus what they pay in terms of dollars, effort, and risk. This is normally what investors will typically ask to see if you're a B2B company. If you're a B2C company and they are experiencing, if there's an experienced consumer marketer in the room, you might get asked about your positioning statement, which is a statement of how you want that target market to perceive your brand, how they would think about it and how they would feel about it. These ideas overlap a lot, but they're not quite the same. And the distinctions aren't that critical for startups. Don't worry about it too much, but just focus on what your customer needs to pay in terms of time, money, and risk to get the benefits you offer, and how you want your target audience to think and feel about your brand. So here's an example from Yapta. And I won't be able to get into this in a lot of detail, but I wanted to leave you with a concrete example of a value proposition statement. You want to address the target and their problem or unmet need, what category or frame of reference you want to be compared to, the benefits, the reasons why the target should believe they will get these benefits, and also think about what they would pay in dollars, time, effort, and risk. The most powerful brands will tap into deeply primitive needs like safety, need for self-expression, et cetera, and you want to think about this. So this statement will inform your messaging framework, which are the main points you want to make with each of your key constituencies at each stage of their purchase process on your website and all your marketing and sales communications. But beyond messaging, your value proposition or positioning statement will guide everything you do, not just what you say. Creating this statement is actually quite hard work, and it's very helpful to use an outside partner to help you see the opportunity from the point of view of your target. So next, imperative number 4 is develop your name and brand identity. These bring your brand to life, and when you're just starting out, it makes you look like a more established business than you really are. This is also something a lot of companies get wrong in the beginning, and you can waste a lot of time and money on this. So first, looking at name, that should refer to your company name, but also brand names for your product or service, and potentially even for some key features. To get your brand name right requires you to consider both functional and qualitative aspects. Can you protect the trademark? Does it resonate emotionally with your target? Looking at brand identity elements, those include visual cues, brand voice, sounds, movement, feel, and smells. So a little bit about each. The visual brand identity will cover your logo, your symbols, your colors, your fonts, and other graphic treatments. Your brand voice will encompass how your brand speaks. That includes your product names, your competitive stance. As an example, would you mention your rivals or not? Actual language you would use or not use, editorial tone, and even punctuation, believe it or not. Consider what other senses would convey your brand identity. Movement, feel, even smell, it all needs to have integrity. So here's an example of name and brand identity from Barn to Door. They provide tools and resources to help sustainable practice farmers manage their marketing and sales functions. Barn to Door is a memorable company name, and they do an outstanding job with their visual identity, in my opinion. Their logo works on both a functional and emotional level, and every aspect of their visuals is farmer-friendly, grounded, and simple, which is a great reinforcement of their main benefit, which is to make farmers' lives easier. I recommend you look at their site. It's really rich. I wouldn't expect to get this perfectly out of the blocks. You should expect to refine your identity as you get more experience with customers. So the 5th imperative is to define the end-to-end customer experience. This customer experience has to consider all the human touch points with you. How will people discover the product? How try or demo it? How buy it? How use it? How they'd get customer support for it or even return a product, how they can cancel or renew, upgrade or buy more, and even how to dispose of it at the end of its life. So in crafting this experience, you want to consider what will make it more memorable, complete, and disruptive. And consider what aspects of the experience you can leverage to really drive growth and profitability. Also, you want to think about what must you do superbly well to acquire customers, earn their loyalty, and build a scalable, sustainable business. If you design your product in a vacuum without considering the consumer, you'll generally fail. And Steve Jobs said it well, you've got to start with the customer experience and work back towards the technology, not the other way around. So for our 6th imperative, help inform the minimum viable product. Does anyone use all the buttons on these things? I have all these crazy clickers and I can't find the button that I actually want to use. So with minimum viable product, you want to work with your team to help inform the basic version from which you're going to learn and develop a stronger product market solution. This covers product features, the services that you'll offer, and your website. So minimum viable product is a crucial decision because this is where all the money and effort goes. And here's where your consumers will first encounter and vote yes or no on your offer. Marketing plays an important role to validate what consumers most want and need in the product or service that you're creating. And marketing representing that customer is in the best position to veto unnecessary features and prevent feature creep like this totally over-buttoned remote. So here's an example from Tonal. They launched in August 2017 with the goal to transform the idea of stock photography by showing images of diverse people and their stories around the world. On the left, you can see they originally launched on a Spotify platform that pigeonholed them into their classification and features and processes. The company took their first subscriptions manually, and they started with just 6 categories of photos. In April 2019, they moved to their own corporate site, which gives them more control over the full experience. The site now offers better search features and infinite scroll. Subscriptions are now automated, and they're now up to 9 categories. So marketing imperative 7 is to secure your intellectual property. This includes patents, trademarks, URLs, and social media handles. Now, the CEO and CFO and VP of engineering will drive the overall IP strategy for your patents. But marketing can still play a role in helping to identify potential applications for that technology. For trademark protection, you're going to want to talk to your lawyer about what you need to protect. People don't generally tend to trademark the corporation, but if your business is consumer facing, you're more likely to need brand trademarks. You may also choose to trademark certain product features or taglines. You also at this stage want to make sure you're getting and grabbing your URLs and all the social media handles that you think you're going to use. And these are harder to get than trademarks today. And I'm showing you InSpa because I think they did a good job. It's pretty consistent trademark URL and social handles. So to summarize the second major step of the marketing process, developing your solution, it's all about satisfying the unmet need and delivering on your promise. Developing your value proposition, naming and brand identity, minimum viable product, and securing your patents are all part of how you do this. And I say patents, I also mean all the trademark and URLs. So now let's talk about the third stage, which is go to market. Imperative 8 is to develop a high performance team. And there's really 2 important questions to consider when doing this. What types of marketing tasks do you need performed, and what talent will you need to deliver it? A few tips to think about. You want to hire what you need as you need it, but you should have an idea of what you're building. And I would advise starting with one really good marketer who's kind of a good all-around player. Now, obviously, you need to have some idea of your marketing plan, even though you may not have formally built it yet. You're going to want to consider the functional and industry experience you need now and also in the future. You want to consider whether the talent should be internal to your company or can you source it externally. And you also want to consider what knowledge people need to have already and what they can learn on the job, and what training and mentoring support they're going to need. And last, you want to consider what type of culture you want to build, because this is everyone's concern and you can't start on that too early. So imperative 9 is to bring on the right customers. Much of the important groundwork will have been done up front when you identified target customers and buyers, defined your product positioning statement or value proposition, and defined your minimum viable product. So whether you're B2B or B2C, depending on that and how responsibilities have been divided, marketing can complement the sales effort by providing background research to help qualify and prioritize potential customers, arm the sales team with insights that will help them make the sale, producing selling materials, and providing ongoing customer tracking and support. The goal of a startup is to find a sustainable, repeatable, and scalable business model. And so much of a startup success is dependent on the early beta period, where you provide access to your product to a limited group of prospects. And these are your early adopters. You want them to be representative of your ideal target and minimum viable product use case, and also willing to work with you to iterate on your offering. You want to get early traction from them and learn from them. But you also want to think about who your most valuable customers are. These represent the customers who are the big profits and influencers, who you might not easily convince to get involved at the early stages. So imperative 10 is to develop your marketing strategy and go-to-market plan. And basically all team members should be discussing this. Marketing strategy covers the 4 P's of product, price, place, which are channels, and promotion at a high level in the context of the overall business strategy. So this is where you'll make the big decisions on how you're going to win in the market and where to invest and where not to invest. Whereas the go-to-market plan goes into detail into the activities needed to launch and sustain the business and assigns responsibilities, timing, and budget. Here's where you're covering all those promotional tactics you'll be using. For example, the SEO, the content marketing, digital ads, PR, email, events, and you get all of that. So in the plan, you also want to include a learning agenda that articulates what hypotheses you want to test about your positioning and value proposition and your product pricing, channel, and promotion decisions, and how you're going to get the needed data and insights. You also want to include metrics or KPIs that tell you are on the right track. These are two types of metrics. There's strategic and there's executional ones. Strategic metrics determine the success or failure of your company. And these include things like what % of business you're getting from repeat customers, or a net promoter score that shows how likely people are to recommend you. If those metrics are bad, something is deadly wrong. Executional metrics can measure how well you're doing. So those could be measures of efficiency and effectiveness of your marketing, for example. The point here is that you want to identify and measure the metrics that apply to your situation. And last, in your go-to-market plan, you want to think about contingency plans for how competitors are likely to respond and what happens if you perform above or below forecast. So now we're at imperative number 11, which is execution. Execution is about delivering the marketing activities in your go-to-market plan. And the best strategy will fail if you can't execute. And it's only once you get in market that you see what's really working. Marketing needs to be tracking key metrics, diagnosing performance gaps versus objectives, both positively and negatively, and recommending how to adjust. This is where you need to be most responsive to what you're hearing from the market and working tightly with other members of your team. So in summary, the most important point for the third marketing stage, go to market, is that you have to align your resources. A great idea will go nowhere if you don't have the people to deliver it, the customers to adopt it, alignment of your marketing strategy and tactics within the context of your business plan, and the ability to execute. Next, we'll cover the last marketing stage, which is accelerate performance. Imperative number 12 is to conduct lean research. By lean research, I mean just enough depth and quality of research to get you enough of an answer to make key decisions and keep going. You need to understand your consumers, what drives them, and how they are responding to your product or service. You need to understand what's working, what's not, and why. And you want to understand how your ecosystem is responding, especially the competition. And you also want to stay abreast of macro trends that can help or hurt. It's important to know that research is an aid and not a substitute for judgment. Startups need continual feedback, and marketing will take point on listening and interpreting data and translating it into useful insights that can lead to action. It's important to revisit and refine your assumptions repeatedly. Do you have the right target, the right product, the right business model? Is your go-to-market strategy working? Is there an emerging macro trend that will affect what you should be doing? And you can tap into secondary research from published sources like general insights into the target you're going after, or primary research you conduct yourself or hire out to help you understand what's happening. You want to use a combination of tracking, observation, interviews, data analysis, in-market experiments, and other methods depending on your research question. And importantly, don't forget to seek out insights from the front line because those people hear everything. So number 13 is plan for expansion. By now, you've hopefully found the right target and product fit and learned what works and doesn't so you can optimize your offer. The next step is to think through where and how to expand, considering which investments will yield the greatest returns. And you obviously need to do this with the entire team. Some examples could be geographic expansion, product or service improvements, broadening your product portfolio, going after new customers, different segments, investing in infrastructure, strategic partnerships, increasing your marketing spend, developing a strong loyalty program, or expanding your team. So there's a lot of things you could do. So for the fourth marketing step, accelerate performance, it's all about getting ready to ramp. And as you understand what's working and why, you can evaluate where best to make your next investments so that you can scale rapidly. So to summarize, marketing is all about identifying a need, developing a solution, taking that solution to market, and listening all the while for what it takes to accelerate performance. Depending on where you are in the process, some of these will be more important. Which are the most relevant to your situation? I'll give you just a second to think about this. And if you want to take a little notes on, you know, what imperative really mattered to you, that would be a good time to do that. I'm trying to clean up my board here. There we go. Okay. So I hope each of you has found one number that you think you should do more on. So in summary, I don't care what you call it, if it's marketing or something else. I don't care who does it, if it's the CMO or it's the CEO. Just do these things, and you can ping me if you want help. And I thank you. And at this point, we're going to open it up for questions. And if we don't get your question now, I'm happy to take your questions through email later.
Great.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll go ahead and put your questions in. We'll get to them as we can. I'm going to start with one here. Candy asked, can we loop back to number 10 and explain the learning agenda a bit more on the go-to-market plan?
Sure. Let me pull that page up. Lean research here, or learning agenda related.
Number 10.
Let's do it here. The learning agenda is really a set of questions that you want to answer as you are getting experience in market. So a question could be something like, is this target audience really getting the most value out of this product, or is there something missing from the experience? You know, that would be a typical question to ask in the beginning. And so you could answer that by investing in research to talk to those consumers, survey them, or you could ask your front line to listen for what they have to say about the product when they're taking the customer support calls. So that would be an example of a learning agenda. So it's a series of questions. Does that address your question?
I'm guessing it's also, you know, I maybe add to the answer that it doesn't require a lot of money to do market research. You can sacrifice a little bit of quality, but you know, so maybe you can't do formal surveys that cost a lot of money, but you can go out and talk to people. You can stand in a store or call up people and do interviews. And I think that's a part of it too, right, Lisa?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And the amount that you invest is really contingent on how important the question is and how good an answer you need. And in the beginning stages, you should be able to hear a lot from your beta customers, your front lines, as I was saying, and doing your own, you know, desk research. So it does not have to be a big amount of money, but what you want to do is make sure you know what questions you should be thinking about. Yeah.
In the early going, when you're trying to validate your product proposition, that's a certain kind of questions, right? And then once you've launched, then there's a different kind of research that we kind of picked up here, which is how do you assess how your product's performing? Are you meeting people's needs, et cetera? Is it basically, you know, different questions, but the same approach?
I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. In either case, you're looking for acceptance of your product. You know, sometimes it's a gleam in the eye acceptance, and sometimes it's you're in market.
Right. And also sometimes what resonates for the, you know, might backflush into what you know, the feature you thought was really important isn't, but something else is. So it helps you modify, right? Yeah. Okay, let's move on to another question from Ryan. If you're building a team and don't have substantial resources right now, what incentives can you provide to obtain long-term team members?
That's a good question. Stock options. That's kind of a flippant answer, but I think it's true, is to give them incentive in a piece of the company is the best way I can think of. But it's also about painting a picture of the vision of what you're doing. You know, because if your vision is really important, like if you are curing cancer, I'm sure there are a lot of people who have a stake in that who are willing to invest some time just to help you out with advice. So I think it's finding the people that have a real, who would really benefit from it.
I think a good question maybe related to that is if, you know, we often see in startups, there are tech backgrounds, people with tech backgrounds, not significant marketing backgrounds, and they can't afford a team, maybe if they're an early stage. Mm-hmm. So where might they find, they can self-educate like the folks are doing here and do some of this themselves, but if they want to pressure test their their thinking or get some advice, you know, where could they do that when they don't, when they're not at a point to hire a marketing team?
Well, one thing I was just thinking about is who you select as your board members and advisors. There might be people there, but I think in this community, there are plenty of people that are happy to just talk to people for coffee, you know, and if you know that there's something you need to get better informed on, you know, certainly in the marketing community, I take calls all the time from people wanting to just get a general idea of where they should be headed. I think the Alliance of Angels probably has a very good network for that kind of thing. And
Yeah,
Bob,
we do.
you could probably comment on that.
Yeah, no, we do. We have lots of folks who are more than happy. In fact, I'll just put in a quick comment. The Alliance of Angels offers office hours for free to entrepreneurs. You can find out more about that by looking at our website, allianceofangels.com. And you can ask those folks, even if the people running the office hours who are volunteer members aren't marketing experts, they can point you to people. I've often had people come to me for that. Just one more question on the job front, and then we'll move on to another topic. But Jackson's asking, what strategies could you use to market job openings to potential employees?
Oh, that's a great question. I think a lot of it is industry specific, but there've got to be affinity groups that you can tap into. That would be one area. If you've got a good LinkedIn network, that would be another. I'd be happy to talk more about this offline because a lot of it may depend on exactly what kind of people you need. And there's certainly Indeed.com and some of those other job sites that I know for marketing positions, at least. I've hired from those for startups. Again, I would be talking to your board members because they're going to know people too.
Okay.
What did I miss, Bob?
Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's great. Let's switch to a different topic. A question about, you know, the timing on trademarks and patents in the early going. Maybe you haven't, you're still researching and developing the product. You haven't validated it. You know, there's sort of a bit of tension between, you know, getting the process going and locking things up versus, you know, spending time and money on something you may not need in the end. Do you have any thoughts about sort of when to commit yourself to those things?
You know, what I would recommend is to find a good intellectual property lawyer and talk to them about the timing, honestly. And this is a little bit out of my wheelhouse because I'm not a lawyer, but it can cost you a lot of money for intellectual property. And that's the biggest of the investments. Getting your trademarks protected doesn't cost as much. So, and getting a URL is nothing, you know, so you could go and get some trademarks, some URLs that you might abandon. And so the cost of doing it wrong is not so high, but it's the patent piece of it. And again, the CEO and the VP of engineering and the others may be driving a lot of that, but the people I know who are patent attorneys would rather hear from you sooner rather than later, and they can advise you on timing. Yeah.
There's another question in here about patents, whether you should go US or global. I think the answer to that's probably the same. It depends on your business strategy. Yeah. The cost is relatively low for trademarks and URLs and things. Those you probably you probably want to get as many of those as you might need. That you might want to make that investment, but the other process can be quite expensive, and you really want to think through that strategy situation alone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you think you'll be global, you should let that IP lawyer know right away.
Different topic. Of the 13 strategies, which steps do companies frequently get wrong or skip altogether?
Oh my. Well, I would say lack of product market fit was the biggest reason that the CB Insights CEOs confessed to being a problem. So in the identify need and not getting that squared away was a big one. But you can fall apart at any point, and that's why I call them 13 strategic imperatives.
Great. Well, here's a question around the concept of positioning statements or value proposition. In some cases, people have a chain to get to market. They may be selling through distributors or resellers or wholesalers to get to the consumer or the ultimate end user. Do you have a different value proposition or value statement for each step in the chain, or is it just one that you use for all of them?
Oh, that's an excellent question. It's really got to be an integrated set of statements. And so what I do is I start with what does the end customer need and work that into whatever I'm saying as part of my sales pitch to that distributor or whoever's intermediate, in the sale. But for the people at the intermediate stage, you got to demonstrate that they will make money and that they will not have risk, and so they may need different support points for that. So there's kind of a chain of them, if you will. But again, I start at the end where the consumer is and work my way back up the chain.
Okay, good. Another area, product naming is an interesting one. And I guess, what are the biggest mistakes that people make when naming their company or brand?
Well, there's two kind of buckets of mistakes. One is the brand does not function, so if you can't trademark protect it, for example, game over. But if the brand name is somehow repellent to your target, that's also a big problem. So there's the two buckets. An example, this is an old example, but Nova, the car, when it went to Latin America, in Spanish, it translated to doesn't go. So that was a really bad brand name.
Great. Talking a little bit about team building again. What are those mistakes that people commonly make when they're putting together their marketing team?
Well, I think one that is turning out to be really important is failure to look at a diverse number of candidates. If you hire someone who's just like you and thinks exactly like you do, you're going to miss out on the different perspectives that others can give you. And I think a second one is if they don't have passion for the business that you're in and they're not willing to go, night and day if it takes that, I think that's an error because then you get someone who's just not really in the game. So those are just two that I can think of. There's many.
Good. When bringing on customers, how do you handle requests to customize the product?
That's a really interesting question for me, because in the beginning, it's tempting to take on any customer at all. But if they're asking for things that are not going to be part of your main product offering that other people will eventually buy, it becomes a distraction. And even if they're willing to pay extra for it, that's taking your team off of something they could be doing for the main business. So if your beta customers are all sitting saying, you need this extra thing, then I would build it. But if one customer with a lot of money is saying, I want one off, I would only do it if that was going to keep the lights on for you so you could fight another day.
Okay. Well, we talked about some common mistakes. When you're in the execution phase, what are some of the common mistakes that people tend to make?
I think one that I see a lot is that you fall in love with your idea so much that you can't take in feedback. And at the end of the day, you've got to be responding to the data that you're hearing in the marketplace. And so, yes, it's possible to be a visionary and see things ahead of everyone else, and everyone else might be wrong, but they're the ones buying your product. So failure to pay attention to what signals you're getting, I think, is the biggest one. It's hard to take. You have to get out of your own way.
I think one of the messages you're putting across in the webinar here is that marketing is much more than marketing communications. That it lays at the heart of the business. The heart. It's really the strategy of the business in terms of how it'll be successful. So who should be involved in developing that? Is that just the marketing person, or and what's the best way to gain alignment on that?
In a perfect world, the marketer should be at the table with the other executives in the leadership team. And I would certainly want the whole leadership team to be giving input and buying into what the high level strategy is. And I think the marketing people on the team have an important voice as well, because in their specialties, they're going to have perspectives that you might not see, and they're going to end up having to do things you're asking them to do. And so they're going to know what's workable and what isn't workable. So whether or not they're actually employees or if they're a trusted partner like your agency or PR partner, I typically invite them into the process as early as I can.
Okay. All right, let me see what else we have. We talked about trademarks and naming. Why is it so important that they be consistent? The example you showed was highly consistent.
It's a matter of reducing friction for the consumer. If you want them to be able to remember your name and find you easily, you don't want them to have to remember a different name for your website versus finding you on social media or in any other environment. So it's a matter of streamlining and simplifying the job they have in their heads.
Okay. You talked at some length about the customer experience. Some people call it the path to purchase. How do you go about understanding what that is, and particularly in a B2B environment where it's going to be, or how might you be doing it differently, and what might you be learning differently in a B2B versus a B2C environment? So how would it be different?
I think, first of all, it's important to figure out what steps they have to go through to, we talked about, everything from discovering to using and getting rid of your product at the end, and knowing what those are, and getting that input from your beta customers as naturally as you can. I see a lot of people doing this wrong, where their idea of UX, user experience, is let's see if they can do the thing we want them to do, but they don't just sit back and let people struggle with your tool, and see why they couldn't even get started, let alone get to the step you wanted to test. So I think it's getting that beta customer to be as open with you and as natural as you can, and you can just watch them do things if that's possible. Or you can just ask them open-ended questions about, how easy is it to use this?
Yeah. I'm getting some questions about a comment I made earlier about office hours. So what I'll do, I don't have the info at hand, but I'll make sure when we do the follow-up email that we include information about how you can participate in office hours for those who are interested. So we'll definitely do that. Another question from Candy: what advice do you have for companies impacted by the pandemic that are adjusting marketing strategies, and are there any trends you're seeing?
Yes. I think it's a good time to revisit what jobs people are trying to do when they're using your product or service, and how that has been hampered. So like restaurants as an example, the job might be, I don't want to cook, I want to feed my family, therefore I'm taking my family out to dinner. Well, now they can't go out to dinner. So now the job is, as a restaurant, how can I bring dinner to them? And so that's when everyone opens up the delivery window, or the takeaway from, go and get it and take it away. And wineries are offering, food to go, so it starts with your service or your product. But then of course there's the marketing investments. Some are going to be, people are home online, they've got more time, and they are doing more online now, and they're certainly not going into the public areas to learn about things. So if it's a consumer product, you're not going to find it in a store. You're going to have to hear about it before they order it from a store. So it's the same process with B2B, is thinking through what still applies. And there will be some things that may be new channels that open up. And I don't know what those might be for your particular company, but think about what might be brand new to do.
It sounds like it based on just this experience with what marketers are doing right now, it sounds like it's a double-edged sword in terms of particularly with marketing communications now, because people can, appear to be cashing in on the problem. Mm-hmm. and then other people can appear to be, genuinely, trying to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. If help save others by buying products from me is what you don't want to be perceived as. So be very careful, I think, and any messaging needs to be, reviewed by people who are dispassionate, who can say, your baby's ugly, don't do that. Yeah. Right? I think we're all getting bombarded with those.
Yeah, I support that point completely. And Matthew's Winery did a good job of pivoting. Sorry, it's a consumer products example, but they changed all their imagery to take all the group photos in the field of, in the winery away, and put another image up that talked about the at-home experience. And they completely retooled it so that wasn't tone as much as it was visuals, but it was reflecting where people are today and respecting where they are.
Yeah, there's another good example that comes to my mind, Lisa, is the some of the breweries and distilleries around that have taken their idle facilities or turned parts of their facilities to making antiseptic that people can use. And they're clearly not in the business of selling antiseptics, but they use this as an opportunity to build their brand. Yeah. And to do it in an honest, authenticity is such a big part of marketing these days. And yeah. So if you're not being authentic, you kind of know it. You got to kind of look in the mirror and say, this is not the time. That's a great question. Thank you for that one.
Yeah, excellent question.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? I think this is there's a ton of, oh, here's one. Okay, from Daniela. What advice would you give to companies who are ready to pitch to investors?
That's a big question. First of all, I think it would be figuring out which investors are the right fit for what you're doing, and learning as much as you can about how they want to be pitched. And a lot of times they'll give you an example, that this is what works for us. So make sure you're going to the right people in the right way. I would definitely practice with other people that may have gotten money from them and see what they've learned about, who asks what questions, if you can get that far into it. What else, Bob? What would you advise?
Well, I think, at the stage where you're talking to angel investors, there's a dance that you do, and you should learn what the dance is in terms of a pitch deck should include, slide. There's different models, theme and variation, but there's about a dozen slides that every pitch deck should include. So, and there's questions you need to be prepared for, and you need to understand, the whole process from pitch through diligence and negotiating terms and such. So getting educated is the first step. AOA offers a pitch clinic, which is a really great program that takes you through all of that. And you can find other resources online as well. I think Lisa's advice of your first deck will evolve. So get as many people who are experienced in looking at pitches, find friendly angels who you can just say, hey, could you just look at my deck? I would create a strategy of where you're going to raise your funds and how you're going to raise your funds. We often, find people will, go do smaller presentations before they come to the Alliance of Angels so that their pitch is refined. but you don't want to wait too long. But I think it shouldn't, whatever the biggest opportunity is for you, don't make that your first pitch.
Yeah.
Ask people to find your flaws. It would be, what's wrong with this? What makes this less interesting as an investment? I think a lot of the things that Lisa's talked about today, showing that you're savvy, not just about your technology or whatever aspect your core background is, but you are savvy about these topics. And also, what you don't know. It may be that you say, look, I got a pretty good handle of where I want to take this product, but I know I'm not, expert in this area, and I'm going to take the money that we raise and I'm going to hire an expert or bring advisors in or consultants to help me do that. And you can, in fact, say, here are the people I've already identified to play those roles. So I think that's a big one, is to be, you're respected when you say, I'm expert in this area and I know enough to be dangerous in this, and here's how I'm surrounding myself with board advisors, et cetera. So there's a lot that goes into pitching to investors. Obviously, understanding the technical aspects of how to value your company and what sort of structure and terms to put in. You want to have all of that kind of done before you start to pitch, so that you're taken seriously. So there's a lot we can talk about there. And as I said, I think office hours are a wonderful place for you to share your pitch deck, with an experienced investor who will give you the feedback. And it's a non-pressured situation because you're not actually there asking for money. So I'd encourage folks to take advantage of that as well. Okay, we are close to the top of the hour. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, well, given that, I want to thank you, Lisa, for a really informative event, and thank everyone in the audience for participating. And we'll send these slides out to you along with our survey and information, and we will see you at another event in the future.
Thank you, everyone.